The Makers International podcast is brought to you by Yorkshire Grit, the Woodturners Abrasive Paste, Highland Boxes for all of your resin and hybrid pen blanks and knife scales, Mancrafting for amazing customizable powder-coated Yeti mugs, and by Harneal Media for their website development and hosting services. For more information, go to www.makersinternationalpodcast.com and click on sponsors.
Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever it is you are listening. Joining me today, as always, Mr. Chris Cute.
How you doing, guys?
Mr. Dale Kirkwood.
Oh, heck, he's talking to me.
We're not even 5 seconds into this thing, and the bus has already driven off the road. Come on,
What have I gotten myself
Mr.
into?
Jake Thompson.
Hello, y'all.
And from the YouTube channel Wood by Wright, it's Mr. James Wright.
Hi, good to be here today.
Oh God, that's James. Don't go there. Don't go there.
James is our resident tool expert for this evening, so he's there to kind of
I
keep
play
us
one
under
on YouTube.
control. So there you go. So I believe it's Dale who's taken the hot seat for the cues from Mr. Pugh today. So
Questions, are we?
I'm going to see if.
Well, wait. Come on. I mean, because I understand there's probably very few mice that live under the rocks that don't know who James is. So maybe we should delve into quickly.
Maybe we should.
About, and I'll leave that up to you, Mr. Page, because you're so good at delving.
I am. You're right. So, James, as I just said on the intro, you do a little, you dabble in YouTube a little bit, and you have done for you have done a little bit. So where did the let's say the YouTube journey begin for you? Why YouTube and why hand tools?
Well, it might surprise a lot of people, but I have 11 different YouTube channels.
11.
Wood by Wright's just the biggest of them. But my hobby is whenever I start a hobby, I start a channel to document my hobby. And there are a pile of crazy people out there, almost 200,000 now, that actually want to watch a lunatic working with hand tools in a shop. And that's the reason why Wood by Wright's here today. So I was just doing it for fun of it, and other people wanted to watch. So yeah,
That's awesome.
I do remember one of your other channels that you started. Forgive me if I've just dropped you in it, but you was in the process of making a Wright plane.
Yeah, that's that one's on the back burner, but I haven't added a video to that one in a while. But that's
there you go.
You were in the process. Wait. You were in the process of building one of the Wright brothers planes.
Yes, I've worked on. I haven't actually completed a full airplane, but I've worked on about 20% of one and about 75% of another one. And so it was my goal to make a modern reinterpretation of the Wright brothers plane.
We're talking Kitty Hawk, Yeah. Oh, awesome.
Like a fully functional 2-seat airplane, but shaped like the Wright brothers.
I thought you was talking about
awesome.
Wright plane, like Mr. Wright hand plane.
I see what you've done there.
Yeah.
Yeah. You make sure that undercarriage is sharp.
Boy.
So, go on, mate.
What got you into the hand tools then? I mean, was it just a quick hobby you picked up, and then you stumbled onto something that made like 200,000 people go, "I like this guy." I mean, what happened?
Well, I've been in woodworking all my life since I was about 5 years old. As soon as I could stumble into the shop behind my dad, I was woodworking, and so I made furniture growing up. And when I got married, I bought my own equipment, and I was all power tools. I literally had never held a hand plane in my life. I had a set of chisels, but they were concrete chisels, and they were hanging on the wall, and I never used them. They just happened to come with something else I bought, apparently. And so I did that up until about 7 years ago, and we started moving. And we moved from one house to another, and every time we moved, I sold off more tools, and we had less space. And I moved into a smaller house, and I sold off more tools, until eventually we got into our last house where I had no space for tools. I sold off everything I had, and I said, I guess I'm just done woodworking. But then we moved into this house, and there was a small space in the basement, about 10 foot by 10 foot. And I became a stay-at-home dad. And I thought, I'd like to get back into woodworking, but I can't do power tools with the kids. I can't do it in the basement in this small space. It wouldn't work out. But then I came across a video of Worth the Effort. He was making I think it was a tonguing plane. And I saw him making it with no tools at all. And I thought, I can do that. So it was a whole new thing of relearning woodworking, but I can do it in my shop where it makes no noise. So I can do it while the kids are napping. I don't have problems with the kids coming in because I don't have a table saw going. I don't have problems with dust in the basement. I can do it in a small space. And it was just kind of this aha moment where I got to reinvent and relearn the joy of woodworking in a whole new light.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's truly freaking awesome. I mean, hey,
that's one of the fun things about my channel is that it is the complete documentation of everything from literally my first video is here. Look, I just bought this hand plane. Let's restore this. And that was the very first video I had was my first ever hand plane.
One of the things I do notice about your restoration videos is everything always ends up being blue. Is there a reason for that?
I like blue. Blue makes me happy.
Blue's my favorite
There
color.
you go.
Don't worry about it. Well, James, today what we're talking about is the evolution of makers, and you've already talked about your own evolution. Unfortunately, we were hoping to go from the 1800s to today. You went from today to the 1800s. So we're talking in reverse of this. We couldn't think of a better person to have on the show to help us transition through this topic today. So maker evolution is the topic. Dale, I know you've got some questions.
Let's cut straight to the chase. Our modern hand tools. Let's go backwards, right? Let's follow this trend.
Okay, all right,
let's go. Our modern hand tools as good as the old ones. Do you think so? How many? I guess the question should be prefix. How many modern hand tools do you have?
Modern hand tools, as in powered hand tools.
As I bought recently, a modern hand plane made to look like a modern hand plane.
I would say about 10 to 15, maybe 20% of my tools are modern made. The rest are antiques.
So taking that, that's a pretty good sample. So let's have a look at this. So are the modern hand tools as good as the old ones? The ones you've restored.
That really is a difficult question to ask, because when you start talking about best, you start talking about a direction, not a location. In other words, is this better than this? Well, there are hundreds of different aspects that this could be better than this. This could be better, and some are a little more. Every person who holds it is going to have different things that they weight. And I think in general, our modern tools are actually better than the antique. And much to the chagrin of the collectors and the historians and people who, well, yes, there's a lot of mystique to the old tools that make them feel better, that there's a connection to that tool that you can't get with a new tool, because hundreds of other people have held this. You think about the other makers that have used that plane before I did. There's a history to it.
So there's an emotional attachment kind of sort of in a way.
Yeah. If you start talking about actual quality, a lot of people out there will tell you that we can't make steel like they used to make steel. And that's just total hogwash. Our steel now is light years ahead of anything they had in the past. It is phenomenal in almost every respect. But there's just something about using that old tool that's been around for 100 years. It makes you feel like it's better. But if you actually go and measure the steel and its durability and its functionality and its resilience to sharpening, in almost every respect, it is a far better steel than it used to be.
So we'll hold on that point for a bit before we go into the sort of classical tools and ask some more questions in that space. So from those 20% of your collection that are modern, quote unquote, and taking that variable question around good, bad, best, from wherever you're standing, do you think there's an element of cheap modern tools and good quality modern tools that also sort of influence that sort of view?
Oh yeah. And if you think about that, there used to be cheap antique tools, but the cheap antique tools just didn't last. And so we've kind of gotten this shaker that's only left the good quality ones that have made it to us. And so you're looking at the absolute best of what used to be and comparing it to the broad range of what we can get today, from Harbor Freight to Lee Nielsen. It's a
Interesting. That's a viewpoint I'd never taken on board. The idea that the crap's gone because it was crap, basically.
I mean, if you're throwing out tools in your shop, you're probably throwing out the junk that you bought when you first got started and you replaced it with better stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that just never crossed my mind. That's an interesting point. So I guess let's get into the sort of guts of this then. So no, I'm not going to go there. I was going to talk about the P word. We'll come back to the P word in a minute. So let's talk about hand tools. I mean, so there was a lot. I mean, the hand tool journey is very long, and from picking up a bit of stick back in the day kind of thing, to all sorts of stone modern tools and stone all the way through to the modern tools. But I mean, really, is there any sort of hand tools that were around not that long ago, or even going back hundreds of years that have kind of just gone now? I mean, the need for them's gone, or the usefulness is gone, or they've been replaced by a completely different ethos. Just what's gone?
There really isn't anything that's gone. There is the standard evolution of how a tool improves. If you go look at an Egyptian saw, an Egyptian saw looks really similar to a Japanese saw, but there is no connection between the two. It was just generated over the years. Now, do we have any Egyptian saws left in function anymore? No, but we have other saws that are very similar to them.
Okay.
And so if you handed a Japanese saw to an Egyptian, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I can use this. It's a big depth function." So there's a lot of modifications that happen over the years, but
we didn't have any pharaohs that were woodworkers. I mean, what's up with that? I mean, because Tutankhamun, come on, dude, you could have picked up a chisel, for crying out loud. Jesus. Anyway, sorry, Neil. Go ahead.
I quietly wandered off and had a vision of Wayne the woodturner helping, and Tutankhamun. No, you're holding the gouge wrong. Just for a second, I'd gone off in I'd gone off in my own little world there for a second. I mean, so like coming back to that idea kind of thing. I mean, so you're sort of describing the idea of kind of a convergent evolution, or there's kind of really only a couple of really good ways to do this, and everyone kind of arrives at a chisel looks like a chisel, an axe looks like an axe, a certain type of saw looks like a certain type of saw. But I mean, sort of, you can kind of, you sort of things that I think about. Perhaps there's a craft that no longer exists that's seen their tools gone. You've collected things and restored things for. Is there anything like that you would specifically sort of jump out at you?
There are a lot of tools that are specific to something that's just not made anymore. In other words, like old lock mortisers. So it used to be that the lock was a rectangular box that slid endwise into the edge of the door. And so there'd be a mortiser to cut out that slot for it to fit into. Those have no need, and so no one's ever wanted to reproduce that tool. The few people who need to make that are doing it with historical tools because they're historical reenactment. Yeah, I did get it. Okay, cool. Here's a hinge mortiser.
Okay.
It looks like a huge scrub plane.
Could you describe it for the audio?
Yeah,
for the folks who listen to the podcast.
It looks like a scrub plane, but the mouth in front of it is about 2 inches from iron to front, and the iron is flat rather than convex. And there's a knob at front and back rather than a tote. But this was designed for hollowing out the mortise that a hinge would fit into. So it's about an 1/8 inch deep, about 3 inches long, about 1.5 inches wide. And so it's basically a router, but it's shaped like a plane to do those large, shallow routes.
And I'm assuming
I've never seen anyone remake one of these yet.
No, but and I can't see them doing it today either. But I mean,
yeah.
I'm assuming the person that did use that and was cutting that, that basic indentation into the wood for the hinge to fit would have been. You're adjusting that blade down all the way, because I mean, you start out small, and you've got to get in there to the level of the metal they were using back then, and the metal they were using back then wasn't really all that thin. So they must have really had to. They must have had to really move that blade in.
Because the way you would do it is you'd mark it out, and you'd come in with a chisel, and you'd take out most of your material with a chisel really quickly, and then you bring that in for the last shaving or two to take.
Oh, so they would flatten the bottom with that then.
Basically. Yeah, it would give you a nice flat space for the hinge to sit perfectly on.
Oh, okay.
It just make that final cleanup a little faster than going bevel down with a chisel.
So, and Jamie, I didn't want to say anything.
Sorry.
Excuse me, Dale, real quick. I didn't want to say anything to Jamie earlier, but you're providing us with a nice breeze sound effect as you sit there and exhale into your microphone. just want to let you. I'm hearing.
Use the force.
The
Anyway,
code word is wacky for that.
Yeah,
Something
wacky.
Yeah, the code word's wacky.
I can edit that back. I can edit that out, Jimmy. Don't worry about it. Doug, go ahead.
So I mean, what I was going to do is I was going to take that idea that that the hand tools that that don't really exist anymore, and I was going to kind of turn it on its head a little bit. So what hand tools kind of like we've talked about saws a little bit, but ubiquitous. They've been around from earliest times to today and are largely the same thing.
Well, if you really think about it, every tool you use in the shop is a chisel. A saw is just a whole bunch of chisels on the line.
Oh, sorry.
A circular saw. Well, okay. That brings up a whole other ball of wax. Is because in the woodworking world, generally a tool to do the work is something that actually will cut the wood. If it doesn't cut the wood, then it isn't listed in the tools list. So mallets generally weren't. Marking gauges were. And so it was that's an interesting mindset. But yeah, I mean,
I didn't know
the table saw.
I did not know that. Okay, cool.
Yeah, if you go back and look at a lot of lists, woodworkers would document all the tools in their shop, and they would list every plane and every saw and every chisel, but they wouldn't list their workbench.
So finely calibrated, highly accurate.
He's got a point. Look at his hammer.
Jimmy's holding up a chisel, folks.
Thus today's confusion. Yes.
So coming back to that point, I guess we've gone off into the hammer piece, but particularly if we go back on, if we kind of dance around, ubiquity kind of thing, things that have been around from earliest times, saws notwithstanding, that you could look at that tool and it's largely the same shape. It does the same thing that it's always done, from back in the day to now.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the chisel because it's the base of everything. Even every tool is a jig to hold a chisel. A table saw is 100 chisels in a circular pattern, and the rest of the saw is just running those chisels in a circle. It's kind of one of those things that's the basic. Saws are pretty well standard. There was a big jump in the 1800s when it moved from being always a linear movement. Saws were always thought about going back and forth to being a circle. That was a really big jump. And
sort of
when that happened,
reciprocating motion to a circular spinning motion.
Yeah, and that happened because of the Industrial Revolution. Because I have a motor, it's really hard to train a motor into a horizontal movement. But if I can keep it in that circular movement, then hey, the world's your oyster.
Interesting. Sorry.
Go ahead. My question was simply this, Jim, because I'm thinking, and the first two things that popped in my head were CNCs and lasers. But is there a power tool today that does not have its roots in a hand tool from yesterday? Because I can think of a lot of power tools today, and I know the origin was actually something different in the past. But I mean, I can't think of a power tool that we used today that didn't have its roots in hand tools.
Yeah, if depending upon how you connect it. I mean, if you go from a laser, okay, let's go chisel. So we have chisel into a saw. You have a bunch of chisels to cut out a groove. Then you have the Industrial Revolution. We want to move that into a circular saw. So we have all these chisels in a circular blade. Well, then you can go from a circular saw to a router. It's basically a really, really small saw blade, but a very, very wide saw blade, and it can have an odd shape.
It's not going that way. It's going that way.
Yeah, or it just depends on how your table's flipped. There's horizontal routers. And then you get the jump to a CNC where you have a router that can then follow an automated path.
Right.
Well, wouldn't it be even easier if you could get that router bit down to the size of a laser beam? Well, why don't I just put a laser beam in there? And so you've got that whole progression that the laser really is the first thing where you don't have a cutting edge slicing the wood out. You're burning it. Well, other than, historical burning crafts for artistic purposes on top, or cutting out a canoe
It's
with a
an
fire.
it's a chisel. It's ablating the surface. You know, I mean, it's doing it by burning it
it's just not a sharp
temperature, but
edge.
it's effectively ablating. Exactly right. Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
routers. I mean, the router today they were hand planes used. They were molding planes that would do what routers do today. That's what the origin of the router is. Yeah, exactly. Bingo.
But yeah, this one's interesting because this is a sash plane, and so it's a molding plane, but it's got two halves, and each one of them is profiled to make the window sash, and so you can spread these apart and make a wider window sash and bring them together and make them smaller. I've actually seen people remake this one because there are people who want to redo window sashes the way they used to be done, but this has absolutely no modern use. It's an interesting one because people still make these, but you don't make windows unless you're doing it for historical reenactment. There isn't an idiot out there who would make their windows for their house with that when you could do it your other ways now.
So I mean, lots of restoration. Lots of restoration, lots of hand tools. Color notwithstanding. Have you ever been tempted to, or have you unintentionally or intentionally, modified an old tool to make it quote unquote better?
Oh yeah, and you'll see this all the time throughout antique tools. Is you'll find them being refit and reshaped to fit the maker's hand, because every hand is different. Here's a saw. This is actually a modern PAX saw. And I've completely reshaped the handle because the PAX saws are really big and bulky, and a router just rounded them off, and they're not very comfortable. But with 20 minutes to an hour worth of file work, you can get it down to something that's very comfortable, carved and shaped, and it fits my hand exactly. It's something that is very, very comfortable to use now. So there's a lot of hand modifications that are created. But usually, if you want something specific with hand tools, you just make it.
Cool. So I mean, apart from hand fit, from everything's a chisel. Is there anything beyond that? Beyond making a bit of fit that you've done that you go back and point out and go, yeah, that thing was a piece of crap kind of thing, but I twiddled this and I fiddled that, and you know what? I really like it now.
Not with antique ones, because if it was crap, it didn't exist. Either it was rusted and it needed to be restored and refixed, repainted, cleaned up, and sharpened.
Blue, obviously.
And painted blue, of course.
Repainted blue.
But if it had a functional problem, it didn't carry around. So usually, if there's something I needed specifically for a specific purpose, I'm going to make the tool to do that.
Before we jump on to the questions directly from the audience, I've got to ask. There's a kind of a loaded question coming up. I might sit back from the screen here, right? So are there any power tools that James uses, and if you were to take that idea, kind of thing, can you tell us, are they better, or is it just that they make them faster? I mean,
there are no power tools in the shop.
There are no.
No, this is a demon controlled yellow brace.
Uh-huh.
For those of you who don't know, I'm lifting up an 18-volt DeWalt. There's a 20-volt DeWalt.
It's funny that you just picked that up, because I was just going to ask: has there ever been a time where you're sawing into something or drilling into something and you thought, damn, I wish this had a plug?
But I have a up in my garage, I have a table saw, I have a thickness planer, I have a handheld planer, I've got 6 routers, I've got a jointer, I have a vac system, and for my personal projects that I don't shoot videos on, I'm using them quite a bit. If I use it on a project I'm working on a video, I show it, and you do occasionally will see power tools coming out. Most of the time it's because I've got a deadline to get this video out, and I'm not going to spend another 3 hours cutting these boards. I'm just going to go run through the table saw.
Got it.
There's a few questions out there, but before I do that, these guys are going to give me a hard time, but I'm too old for peer pressure or bullying. But I want to tell you, when I first started woodworking, I found your channel because how to sharpen a chisel and how to use a hand plane. and all of that kind of stuff. That's how I found your channel. I have a CNC machine and all that stuff. I built a TARDIS, and all the signs on it are made with a CNC machine and everything. But the top of it was slanted, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I grabbed a hand plane, I sharpened it, and I shaped the whole top of that thing with a hand plane. And I was more proud of that than I was the whole thing. So thank you very much for your videos and continuing to do those.
On that note, one of the things about my channel that really confuses people is my channel is not about fine woodworking. My channel is not about historical woodworking. My channel is not even about hand tools. My channel is about how to have fun in the shop.
Cheers to that.
Because that is what a lot of people try to be perfectionistic. They try to be professional, and we're starting to lose that enjoyment of, let's just go to the shop and make some shavings.
Have some
And
fun.
there's something about hand tools that is you get a proud moment that I did this with my hands. I'm the one who pushed this thing. And it feels good. That's something you just don't get with power tools. And that's what the
Look
channel's
at me. I made this.
Yes.
I like the fact that you got Mrs. Wright out there now. Forgive me. Is it Sarah? Is it Sarah? Her name is?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I did get it right.
So
Sarah,
how much
Sarah,
is-
I think I had to get it right.
Sarah,
How much is the
along with-
discount? Sorry, Chris. Go on.
Sarah, along with everybody, all you other wonderful ladies who have birthed children, happy Mother's Day today here. I don't know if you guys are celebrating it in the UK
Oh
or not,
yes, exactly.
but it is
not
Mother's
today.
Day in the US. So James, tell her we said happy Mother's Day. Okay.
Will do. Hey, come here. Speaking of which,
I'm spying.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.
I heard
she's watching, guys.
So whisper quietly. How
you modified was your rocket powered hand plane.
Oh yeah, I did do that. I
Oh,
strapped
yeah.
rocket engines to a hand plane and made shavings with that. My powered hand tool.
My God.
that's up there. That's up there. That's definitely up there. That's
Check
definitely
it
up there.
I know you got some questions from the chat out there.
I do.
One final one for me, and then promise I'll shut up, kind of thing. So the question is, while she's out of earshot, how much is the discount that you take when you buy the tools, the effects? How much do you discount the price when you're telling the wife how much they cost?
Well, that was the thing when I first got into it. I did that a lot, but now that it's a business, it's like, oh well, this is a business expense now. So,
All right. I see. I need to write that one down.
Oh.
Right.
as soon as you can sell something, then it's like, oh well, I need this tool to make that, and that's why
I'm gonna
the
try that
first
with
many
Sydney.
projects I made were for my wife, so I could say, well, babe, if you want that,
I need this tool.
I need this.
Yeah.
All right, so Andy had another question in the chat. He says, "Have you thought about writing a book on the use of hand tools and the history of them?"
I've thought about it, but I'm not sufficiently knowledgeable in any particular aspect enough to write a book, at least that I can think of. And I could write a book about the joy of woodworking, but I don't know how many people would really want to buy that because it's not really a how to learn something.
All right. The the other question in the chat is from Benjamin. He says, "Do you ever pop?" Yeah, Benjamin. There's a space in there, man. You pronounce your words how you pronounce them. I'll pronounce them how I pronounce them.
Benjamin.
Yeah. So he says, "You ever pop down to the local Walmart wearing your wooden clogs?"
Yes. I wore them into Menards once. Menards is a local big box store.
There we go.
I'm glad you read that out.
I have driven my
I'm glad
car
you
with
read that
clogs.
out.
Don't
I'm
wear
glad
them
you
to
read that
Walmart.
out, Jake.
Somebody's going to take a picture of your feet, and then it's going to become a meme, and it's just not going to be funny.
So for the people out in the chat that don't know about the clogs that we were just talking about, on the 4th of March in 2017, James carved some clogs as part of a carving challenge. So go back and check that video out. They come out fantastic.
I'm glad you read that question out, Jake, because what I'd got to do is I hadn't looked at it properly, and I go, "Do you ever go to Walmart and buy some Pop-Tarts?" I mean, that's what I'd read. Isn't that clogs?
Hey, it's a toss up because My eyesight's not that good, and I could have said something like that.
Oh dear.
That's it for the chat. Any other questions? Go ahead and put them in there, and I'll get them to James here.
James, I wonder if you could give me the and I'm gonna tell. This isn't gonna be a hard test, obviously, because I mean I'm not that smart to give you a hard one. But let me go through a couple tools that I have in my shop, and maybe if you could tell me what the origin of that tool was. If you don't mind, I mean, and bear with me because this is probably very
in a factory in China.
Oh no!
Well, hey, look at that.
No. I'm historically speaking. This term, God, you know what? I don't even like you, James. I don't even like you anymore. But these guys, I mean, these guys are no freaking fun. All right, James. Let me start with the lathe. What was the lathe before the lathe is what we know it as today?
Well, a power lathe would then step down to a flywheel lathe. So it's basically the same thing, except for your foot's running around a motor. And then you have a spring pole lathe, which is a rope wrapped around the cord. And so as you put the pedal down, it rotates correctly. And then as you lift the pedal up, it rotates back the opposite direction. So it's reversing. So 50% of the time you're cutting and 50% of the time you're not. It's an incredibly fun tool to use. It is not very efficient, but it's incredibly fun. Then you can take that back to the Egyptian lathe, which takes the lathe and stands it on end. And then they would put a bow on it. And so the string we wrapped around it, the bow would go back and forth. So it'd still be reciprocating. And so either you would have one person running it and another person working it with a chisel, or you'd have a really talented person holding the chisel and running the bow. And there are people who can do that, which is really fascinating to watch.
If I'm not mistaken, I think wood turning was invented in Egypt.
That is the earliest we know of it. But that's the earliest we know of a lot of things because the desert's very good at protecting and keeping them.
Mm-hmm.
It could have happened in England, but it just rains too damn much in your country.
That's right.
One of Wayne the Woodturner's earlier holidays.
All right, another. Well, that was more in depth than I thought it was going to be. So thank you. An easy one though. Okay, today's drill press. What's the origin of that?
Lazy woodworkers. Well, okay. Let me back this up because this is actually one of the key things that I'm fascinated with is the difference between the hand tool mindset and the power tool mindset.
Mm-hmm.
If you are raised in power tools like I was, you always think about a jig first. You think about a way to hold the tool or hold the work so that the work can be done to it. Whereas the hand tool mindset is I take a chisel and I carve it. And if there's something faster than carving it, then I might employ that. But that's like the hinge mortise, or if I want to make a mortise for a hinge, I'm just going to carve it. But if I've got this tool that will take off that last shaving a little bit faster and cleaner, then I'm going to use that. But even this is then starting into that power tool mindset because it's a jig that holds the chisel rather than just the chisel being there.
Gotcha.
And I was actually just in Williamsburg, Virginia, in Colonial Williamsburg, talking to the guys there just this last weekend. And it's one of these fascinating things that if you have a power tool mindset, your mindset is, how do I make a jig to hold the tool to guarantee accuracy?
Mm-hmm.
And the skill then becomes in either making the jig or setting up the jig. Whereas in the hand tool mindset, it is, I don't want a jig. I just want to grab a chisel. I just want to grab a saw and remove material. And in that case, the skill is actually in the manipulation of the tool. And so there's a mindset difference there that it's kind of hard to see because it's a very gray area. At what point, is a jig holding a chisel? And it's a fascinating thing to me to actually see that. And so when you get to a drill press, sorry, what's that?
Go ahead. No. Well, I'm assuming the root answer to your question is going to be the drill press actually came from a brace. But I mean,
well, no, the drill press actually came out of the metalworking industry, because in metalworking, you're drilling very slowly through material. And if you have a brace, you introduce a lot of wobble. And
Gotcha.
because you're drilling slowly, it's hard to start the bit. It's hard to get it going accurately. And so you end up with an enlarged hole at the top until the bit eventually bites enough that it starts drilling straight. Whereas with a drill bit, it's a jig that holds the drill in place. And so the predecessor to it is actually called a post drill. And it was almost exclusively in metal shops. And it was a hand cranked drill, basically, that ran just like a drill press. And every rotation of the crank, it would lower the bit, 64th or 100th of an inch or some fine small amount. And so you just crank and crank and crank, and it would turn the bit while slowly lowering it. And then the step before that is the egg beater drill, where you have the crank on the side of the drill that's turning. And so
I remember those. Yeah.
The post drill is basically an egg beater drill, except for it's on a jig to hold it vertical and keep it straight. And then, of course, before that, you have the brace, which is, I guess you can take it back one farther and go to a gimlet, which is basically a drill bit you hold in your hand and you turn with your wrist. Like a screwdriver.
No, that's never
They
happening.
open bottles of wine, don't they?
That's
Yeah.
that's never happening. I'm not going to spend 6 hours to drill one hole. That egg blender you're talking about, that's kind of the same. It's somewhere in that story. It relates to the same story with like a drill driver, because there were those. Remember those screwdrivers? I'll give you a backstory. But my grandfather was a machinist, and he was a machinist back in the early 1900s, and he used to make those drills. The pulled out that has the spiral end on it, and then you push in, and it would turn. You pull it back out, and it would turn as you pushed in.
Yankee
and
drill.
so that's yeah. What do they call them?
Yankee drill.
That's
the Yankee screwdriver drill thing.
Right. I mean, so I'm guessing that would be kind of along the same lines when you look at today's drill driver. That would be prior to today's drill driver, but before that, it would have been like you just said, the brace and things of that nature.
See, that's kind of an interesting thing, because Yankee drills aren't drills; they're drivers.
No, they're not.
They're
drivers.
designed to put a bit in, to put a screw in.
Yeah.
They almost were never used to drill a hole. There are people who have modified them to do that, but mostly they were a driver. Whereas the first electric drills, were basically just used for drilling holes. And it was actually not until the late 70s, early 80s that people started putting driver bits in them.
Gotcha.
Wow.
What about a
At least
bandsaw? What about a bandsaw?
Well, that came about the same time as a circular saw. It was the same adaptation of it's that link between the linear movement of the saw and the circular movement of the motor. If you're used to doing a linear movement, well, it's easy to think about, I wish my saw would go farther. I need a longer saw. Well, what if I make this saw infinite and just have it going around in a loop? And so you start to see those come out in the 1880s, 1890s.
Miter saw.
Well, I mean, a miter saw, those were around since Egyptian days. It's basically a box that holds the saw at an angle, and you can cut at precisely that angle. And they get more and more fancy up until someone decides to put a circular saw on top of it.
Until somebody adapted the table saw to the miters they did, basically. Yeah.
Wrench.
Love Angel had a question about drills, and it had to do with bookmaking. I would imagine that'd be more of a punch than a drill, going through several pieces of paper. But any thoughts on that?
You would use a drill if you're doing a hand woven binding. You'd put it all together and drill through it all, because you don't want to punch through a significant.
What kind of? Her question was what kind of drill, or what? How would you do that?
Depends on the time range, but pretty much anything from a simple brace to a gimlet to an egg beater drill. That's one of the interesting things with. Someone says, what is the historical way to do this, or what is the what's the word I'm looking for? Historical. traditional. What's the traditional way to do this? And then I have to ask, what tradition? Because in every location, there's a whole history of different traditions that occurred over different time periods and different people. And so you start looking at like New England woodworkers in the 18th century, there were 5 or 6 different traditions that were concurrently going on in different places throughout New England. And so there is no traditional way to do it. You know, how would you have drilled through a book? Well, there are hundreds of different ways that it would done.
James, have you ever visited one of those and they're kind of tourist attractions, the old villages where everybody who works there is dressed up in the motif of the era, and then you actually have the craftsmen that are using the tools and things that are of that era. Have you ever visited one of those places?
That's what I was talking about with Colonial Williamsburg. That was at just this last weekend. Mm-hmm. And that Colonial Williamsburg is a step above just the reenactment, because there is a cabinet shop there, the Hay Cabinet Shop, and the whole purpose of that is studying historical pieces. So they'll bring in a historical piece and break it apart and look at the tool marks on it and say, how did this craftsman make this? What tools did he use to make this? And then duplicate it, trying to use those same techniques. And so there's 5 or 6 guys there, or people. There's a woman, which wasn't historical, but they're actually actively studying how it was done in the different times and different places. And so it was fascinating to pick their brains and actually talk through what they do.
There you go. So I saw a TV show it was quite a while ago about old tools and such, and different ways of running them. There was of course water that they used to run an old sawmill, and it was all connected up. And there was table saws and routers and all connected to a big flywheel and that was running off the water. But I saw once that they used like donkeys and horses and all that sort of stuff to run saws. That was kind of interesting.
Yeah, flywheel shops and the belt shops are incredible. There's actually one not too far from me that's a machine shop, and it's run off of a water wheel. And so they have a 16-foot machining lathe run off of this water wheel, as well as all the other machining, like a bridge, basically, that's run off of a water wheel.
Nice. Yeah, you see these great big leather belts that are about a foot wide.
Yeah,
running these machines, it's just unbelievable. So,
yeah, if you ever wanted to think through the historical transition from power tools to hand tools, it is a fascinating subject. I don't know if you guys have time for that, but
no, we've got plenty of time.
Yeah, we've got time.
Okay. Well, if you go back to like the 1880s. That was the start of the Industrial Revolution for general woodworking and cabinetry. And you start to see all sorts of weird contraptions. And you see crescent and peg joinery for dovetails and things like that starting to come out. What's the other name for that? I can't remember. But from that point on, you start seeing a lot more machines coming in, but hand tools are predominant. Hand tools are what gets the work done. The machines just get things close to it. And up until about World War II, when everything really becomes mechanical. And in World War II, there were huge drives for scrap metal. And a lot of the old foot-powered machines were huge, beefy metal monstrosities that were getting replaced with lighter, faster machines. And so a lot of these foot-power things were scrapped out because they weren't used as much. And that kind of sped on the power tool thing. Well, up until that point, there really wasn't such a thing as a hobby woodworker. You did it for a job or you didn't. Right? There were hobby woodworkers, but they were really weird and very rare. There's some actually interesting things like 1600s hobby turners that came in the higher echelon of the people.
Well, my father, I can only base it on my father's experience. My father was actually in the service at the tail end of World War II. but both he and his next youngest brother, my father was the oldest, they both learned woodworking in school.
Yeah.
But their education in woodworking ended with school. But my dad told me, he says, no, but I spent 4 years in wood shop.
Yeah.
Well, so they spent time learning it. They just never actually used it as a profession.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating thing, because from like 1800 until World War II, shop was pretty much mandatory for every boy. And most of what we consider high school now is getting ready for college. Back then, high school was the trades.
Mm-hmm.
You learned trades, and you might learn multiple different ones so you can kind of see what works for you. And at the end of World War II, you got a lot of people coming home with some extra time on their hands, and you started to get this class of hobby woodworkers. There were people who learned those shop trades, and they found that it was kind of fun. And with the price of machine tools coming down, they could start to get these really functional shops. And so from that point on, you start to see the hobby woodworker going concurrently with the professional woodworker. As tools evolved, the hobbyist and the professional were pretty similar. And that carried through until around the 80s. And you'll see a couple journals where you'll have someone talking about, I flattened this board, and they'll be talking through it, and they say, well, you'll have to pardon me, I just used a hand plane to flatten it rather than using the surfacer. Because it was kind of like the old school, you just fell back on what you knew using a hand plane. But the interesting thing is, around the 80s to the 90s, you start to see this divergence between professional woodworkers and hobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have professionals who become quick and efficient and start to use cheaper quality things, and the hobbyist can't afford those high-end, really big machines to do the professional speed.
Right.
And so there starts to be a variance there, but they're still both very solidly power tool. Until around late 90s, early 2000s, you see a renaissance of people who are like, I'm doing hand tools, I'm doing woodworking, but I'm really not enjoying this because I'm using this power equipment that is fast and it's efficient and gets things done. But I'm doing computer work for my work. I want to do something that's manual. And you start to see people picking up those hand tools again. And now we're kind of splitting and going back full circle. And there's a lot of people just wanting to do things manually because at work they do things with a computer, and all the power tools are turning into computers.
Well, James, we have another question from the chat, and I'll reserve that for Jake. But and let me ask you this question: do you think that now it's more of a what you were just describing is more of a therapy for people to get out? Yeah,
very, very much so.
Yeah.
Well, have you heard of the Purple Heart Project put on by Rob Cosman?
No.
The Purple Heart Project is a project he does to help veterans who have had all sorts of problems, whether it be physical problems, mental problems from the service. And he brings them in and gives them an entire week of training in his shop or wherever they happen to have the session. Gives them a full set of tools, and there's a group of guys out there making benches and other tools to give to them. So when they leave the shop, they have a full shop of tools, as well as regular ongoing classes, and they use this as a therapy for rehabilitating veterans. Incredible project.
No, I think that's awesome. But I was talking more about the and that's great. Because this is how I was when I was working. I was working a 7-to-7 job, and I was in the technical, somewhat technical field. But when I came home on the weekends, I went out to my shop as a sort of brain therapy. Just I need to get out of that world, and I need to get into a different world. And so my question was, would do you think people are out there doing that by hand now as kind of a mental release? Okay, cool. Jake, I know you had a question.
I'll know people who go out to the shop and won't make anything. They'll just run a plane over board and make curls, because there's something that's just so rewarding about seeing those amazing curls coming off, that the curl itself is the whole purpose, and it's very therapeutic.
Ben Jammin, I just like saying Jammin, by the way.
I love it.
There you go. you ever think they'll reach a point where the metal used in planer blades will be so good you just replace it instead of sharpen it, kind of like carbides for turning?
Yes. Well, in plain blades, not so much. And there's a big variance there because there are people like me. I love to sharpen. I enjoy that part of it. So getting a really resilient, hardworking blade doesn't really hold that much appeal to me. But there's something very different about the high-speed work that you get with turning and the high-speed work you get with power tools where carbides really become useful. Getting a carbide on a plane does not last as long as a carbide on a power tool because it's not being heated up. And it's a very interesting thing is that the carbides will last longer than the steel on a hand plane, but they still dull out far quicker on a hand tool than they do on a power tool. And one of the other reasons for that is because you can have a dull tool in a power tool and it still works. But if you put a dull tool on a hand plane, it doesn't work.
Gotcha.
You've got to have it far, far sharper for it to do its work.
All right. Well, God, you're a wealth of knowledge. And James, at some point in time, we would love to have you back on with us because we'd like to do a spotlight on you and talk about your journey and where you've gone and all that kind of good fun stuff. But unfortunately, there's a segment in the show where we have to let Jamie's knock on wood today's Jamie's choir sing. Jimmy, you have the choir queued up, ready to go?
I've got it queued up, but I need to know more about this rocket plane next time we have James on.
Yeah, we need to have James on again. There's no doubt about that. And James, would you be agreeable to come back on with us?
Oh yeah, anytime. This is
all
fun.
Right, cool, awesome, rock and roll. Jamie, go. Please let the choir sing and not you.
I'll get this lined up then. Right, here we go.
Jamie's page. That's so much better. So much better.
God. I don't have to take my headphones off for that one. That's just so.
Auto tuned to perfection. Right. So, what have we got for this week? Not really that all that much, to be honest. As people have probably seen around social media. This past week, no one really knows if Make Essentials going ahead or whether you decide to go or not. No, only you know that right now. But should you do want to go, there's £20 off at checkout if you want to get your stickers via us. We do get a little bit of kickback from it. So for more information on that, you go to megasinternationalpodcast.com/stickers and you can get, like I say, £20 off at checkout. So there's that. Of course, I've got a premiere coming up in 37 minutes. Bit of a plug going on there. So we'll do that. So we'll go on to my shout out. So my shout out this week goes to Pask Makes. He actually made a scraper plane and all of the hardware. And a lot of it was made out of wood. And it's part of his scrap wood challenge, which is arguably one of the best intros I've ever heard in my entire life. When you go scrap wood challenge, you know what I'm talking about. You got to hear it for yourself. But it's awesome. It's a bit of a lengthy video, but it's well worth the watch.
Jimmy just had to sing, didn't he? He had to sing something.
Something.
I didn't sing all of it, so I was being nice to you.
He snuck it in there.
Good job. Good job.
So there's that. So yeah, that's my channel. So obviously, James, you being the guest, have you got any shout outs for us this week?
Yeah, I've got to give a shout out to Maker238. That last name.
Deloach.
Yes. No, he honestly, I think he is one of the next big up and coming YouTube people, and I really like watching his stuff. He has a very interesting flair and a lot of fun.
Awesome. Maker 238.
He's currently making a pool out of a dumpster.
Yep. Okay. Yes, he is. He is indeed. I've seen, but I mean, you can't let that go without talking about the beard. The beard is a moment.
Yes.
You know. Shall I do mine?
Yes, go for it.
I'll do mine, shall I? So tonight's is Sculpty Works, and they were making a Tiffany lamp, a fox themed Tiffany lamp for Mother's Day. Now this is a full on Tiffany lamp, cut from glass, leaded, put together. I mean, a beautiful thing. A lot of work. Very dangerous in some respects. If anyone's ever worked with glass and had to shape it, so go check him out. He normally does a lot of work with violins, and it's quite a mixed bag on the channel. But go check this out. The end result was beautiful. Really, really worth looking at.
Name of the channel again, Dale?
Sculpty Works.
Sculpty Works. Links for everything is down in the description today, folks, if you're interested. So go check that out. Jake, what about you?
I got Pam Harris of Highland Boxes. She's one of the ones that, when I first started doing resin casting, she was one of the ones I learned everything from. I was able to meet her last year or the year before in Maker Central. It's up in the air whether that's going to happen again. So she was on a chat the other day, and I was so happy to see her. So Pam Harris.
Awesome. Highland Boxes is the name of her channel, right?
Yeah.
But since you went back to your roots, I'll go back to my shout out because this is the gentleman who got me started on YouTube because he helped me learn how. Mr. Sterling Davis put out a video back on Friday, I think, and true to form for him, he built himself a spirit shelf, which had nothing to do with the Almighty. If I might, if I might go ahead and let you know that a different sort of spirit, if you catch my meaning. Anyway, Sterling, it was actually a pretty cool build that he did. It was, wrought iron and wood, and it was, hey, whatever. Sterling, I love you. We all love you. And if you haven't had a chance, I think you put that video on last Friday, so go check out Sterling Davis.
He is one seriously fun guy.
Oh, he's a great dude.
Big time.
He's doing TikToks with rappers, man. He's in there. Yeah, he's doing good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. There was actually one thing I did actually forget for.
Gosh,
and that was the Virtual Craft Festival. That is back once again on the 29th of May. 16 hours of makers throughout the day, starting from 10 a.m. in the UK right the way through for 16 hours, and it ends on Carl Jacobson's channel. So yeah, we've got all sorts of people on there, from potters to resin artists to scroll sawers to turners to all sorts of stuff. Cooks, yeah, cooks and Franco.
Sorry, Franco. I don't know these people.
Just keep that down in your diaries. James will have to talk about getting you on there one day, sir.
Sounds like fun.
If you're up for it. So yeah, that's I think that's it for today's shows, boys. So let me quickly get my mouse. I think my battery's run out of my mouse. All right, there it is. It's working again. Right, so until next week, when we will be talking about the All Gear No Idea episode. If you don't know what that's about, you'll have to come and join us next week to find out. So yeah, until next week, we'll see you guys next week.
Have a great week,
everybody.
All right, y'all be good.
Bye.
See you around.
Awesome.